squared away. So just some quick introductions. We've lost a little bit of time already, so I want to get into the content of our presentation here as quickly as possible. So just real briefly, my name is Tony Suarez. I'm part of the faculty at Valparaiso University, a little teeny tiny 5,000 student college on the shores of Lake Michigan, about 15 minutes to the lake, about an hour from Chicago. It's a really lovely school, lovely town. And these are two of our soon to be like completed grad students, but I'll let them introduce themselves and we'll get going. So.
My name's Blair. So we graduate next week, which is Springs. Same program, finishing next week. Subject position. So.
Yes. So yeah, our topic today, the identity challenges faced by student athletes in transition. Transition throughout the presentation. We're talking about this earlier in the week. Gosh, I guess an appropriately timed topic given what's happening over in Tokyo with Simone Biles. I know we're talking about student athletes, but technically she's still an amateur athlete. So really, it might turn into a conversation about mental health of athletes in general. So we'll certainly get into that if you want to take it in that direction. If you guys have comments that are just generally related to athlete mental health, we could definitely do that. So, that was great. What? Oh, it did? All right, fantastic. So let's see. That's where we're from. That's not going to work. So. Holy smokes, guys. This is... There we go. So,
So just kind of to read the room a little bit, tell us what your role is, if you're a teacher or a student, a little bit about you, just so we can kind of understand what we got in the room.
I was so
what was your sport?
student athlete, so I originally actually got injured by it just because I have some life experience. So more music side of things, but so yeah, I thought it was really interesting. That is
Spell on.
yeah. Well,
For sure. Drawn to it. And interesting you bring up music too, because really when we start talking about identity, it's just any I guess specialized area that you really put all your eggs in. Right? That can get you in trouble, whether it's being an athlete or a musician or a dancer or even a student for sure. Right. So yeah. So I think there'll be some
I saw a lot of athletes just kind of dealing with that transition. Very small private schools. The realism of your athlete
Hi, I'm Tanya, and I've been a middle school counselor for So I ran track in high school and, which was the football plan. So I stayed away from sports until about 15 years ago. Then I got back into it, so I do half marathons, triathlons, duathlons, coach cross country and track. And I guess for me, it's not necessarily a transition, but it was an odd feeling for me. I never thought of myself as an athlete. I just thought, oh, I'm kind of into sports and then health and fitness, you know. So it was a really odd thing when I went to the doctor for the sports injury. She said, well, you athletes. I'm like, what? So almost the reverse of that transition to women, thinking of myself of it as an athlete.
Yeah.
I still am like, don't be an athlete.
Never. Yeah, it's interesting. So maybe not identifying enough in that. Stuff with credit.
Yeah, more of trying to, and I guess that's funny, because I guess that applies when you think about a transition. As a middle school cross country and track coach, I'm helping kids transition into finding who they are as athletes, who they are as students. So it's kind of, their journeys.
Yeah, and some of this transitional work, like let's say from middle school to high school to college, it might not be a transition out of the sport, but it might just be from one level of competition to the other. And dealing with that, and if you were like the star athlete on your high school football team, and you go to play collegiately, and everybody's the same, right? That's going to play some mind games with you too, and adjusting to that. So. Yeah, so you know, always transitioning out, just transitioning from one thing to another, right? Just a little bit different. Okay. All right. Let's see if I can get this to. Yeah. Okay. So just a quick outline of what we're going to talk about.
Yep, so we're going to do population, which we talked about, just going to doing literature review, case study, and it's like personal stories too, just to kind of tie it together and make it a little for recommendations after the case study, it kind of flows into what we think we could give somebody in that situation, what you guys also think that we could do for our student athlete going through what the case study discusses, and just do a quick Q&A and a discussion.
Sounds good. Yes. All right. Yeah, so, when we're talking about student athletes here, high school, we're also talking about college, right? And some of the literature that we collected here for this study addresses both, right? So we've taken some liberties here and sort of combine that because some of the themes are going to be consistent from one group to the other. So just ask you guys, and a lot of athletes as well, but what do you know already about how student athletes might be different than the rest of the student population? There's some things that pop out. Okay, yeah, so the schedules are a lot different, right? They're taking classes, but they also have practice, lifting, right?
Yeah, all that.
For sure.
We need to do more kind of organizing of what their week looks like. I was thinking we do more focus on performance. I've seen the student athletes who don't care at all about academics, but I've been really blessed with my cross country team that you teams on the whole. So they're very driven, goal oriented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, regardless of the role they want to cross first.
That competitive spirit.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Those things that might lead into an injury or normal kids. Schools also.
And discouragement from looking at, like, exploring other things you might be interested in, or just where people are having fun. You can't do things that might get you hurt or that takes away from the role to swim in that case.
That's what they call it.
I think that's where. Now you have it, and sometimes it's just, and sometimes it's, you know, I'm freshman year of college, so far after that, where it's.
So what's the flip side of that? How are student athletes the same as everybody else?
Required to do the same thing, they're still required to perform on.
Yeah, and newsflash, they have feelings.
Yeah.
And they're hard, they get stressed out,
We don't love
people, right? Like, they're not just machines and robots, and like some people want them to be. So, yeah, the mental health needs of student athletes. While it's nothing new, because a lot of the data we pulled actually put from a 2007 report by the NCAA that addresses the major issues of student athlete mental health. So I encourage you, if you're interested in some more information, if you go to ncaa.org, you can find a report. It's a free download. It's a really informative resource to have, especially if you want to work with athletes in the future. So anyway, it's not new that they have mental health issues, but what still remains are the barriers for treatment. Right? So we've talked about schedule. That's a problem. Where if the schedule permits, well, because like counseling centers close, right? If you're talking about a college campus, there's anywhere for you, like 5 o'clock, it's done. That does not fit with the athlete's schedule at all. So, like, is there a therapist maybe that's working housed inside the athletic department? Like, that might be an option there, right? So, but you know, it's not really the case at BU. I'm not sure what that looks like in other institutions, but I think it's the norm to have somebody in the athletic department. So schedules, time, like the athlete mentality, right? The toughness. Like, this is like to show the vulnerable side of me somehow makes me weak. I always say, like, that's kind of the opposite, right? Like, when you're able to be vulnerable and say, like, yes, I'm struggling, this is really hard, but I'm not afraid of it. I'm going to feel it, and I'm okay putting it out there. Like, that's where the strength lies. But that's not the lessons that we're taught about performing at an early age. I mean, think about like the idea of, like, especially the sports where there's more physical contact. Like, you play through it, you play through the pain. If you don't, then there's somebody waiting on the sideline to take your spot. So the lessons that we learn in athletics from our coaches, from our parents, from the other direction, is that we don't really acknowledge the hurt, the pain, we don't if we notice it, we still kind of push it away because there's a task, there's a job to be done.
Is if I go, is it gonna end up being, or are they gonna report to my coaches, or is it gonna be something that's going to disqualify me from?
That's a great point. Yeah, the confidentiality piece, like who is privy to the information? Who's hands is it? For sure.
I worked with that. I had coaches that were very accepting of their work. But not being licensed clinically, a lot of what I was allowed really to work. And of course, once they get comfortable with you, it's always tied to something. You want to be able to work with them deeper. You have to refer them, and I had, every single athlete that I worked with on my team was saying, no, I want to talk to somebody else. I was just with the soccer team, and that was fine, but to have to then go outside of the athlete level to a normal student service of that was just not an option for
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm also thinking now a barrier would be if they were to go see a clinician in the counseling center or somewhere else, would they really understand what it's like to be an athlete, the unique pressure that I'm under?
that was a lot of it. They're like, when you're here and you see what we're going through, you saw
Right.
how coach talked to me at practice. That's my issue.
Yeah.
And they don't feel understood.
So, all right, but, hey, this was. Not going to ask the question why. I'm just happy to do that. All right. So what did we do? So we looked at 52 articles. This seemed like a good round number. But we with the search term student athlete mental health identity transition just to see what literature existed out there. And again, nothing like groundbreaking as far as like what we looked at. A lot of the stuff is out there. It's just I don't know if it's part of the conversation enough to the extent that it ought to be to get some traction in how we treat our student athletes. So we borrowed the grounded theory coding framework for this, so open code, actual code, and our selected code themes. And this is what we found. This is me or what you guys? All right, go for it.
So yeah, in terms of mental health, so there's obviously, like we talked about, just the amount of stress and anxiety themselves under, but it might have extend to like outside people as well. Just like the expectations we talked about, like, the performance. I know in my high school, like probably college too, but you had to have at least like a 3.0 to risk like losing that spot or having to fight 100 times harder for it. If you're lucky, some college campuses may swipe that under the rug, but that still adds some type of level of stress and anxiety. And we talked about or found that about like one of the transition home and living in a dorm. I never lived in a dorm, but I'm sure just the enclosed things you have, and it definitely like your roommate too is not on the same schedule as you. Just the conflict of that and being in small quarters with someone, I'm assuming would heighten the stress of your roommate not understanding anything. Depression. So this probably is a whole wide range of this can fall under different habits, but it can come from a lack of playing time, getting injured and not being able to play, or the total opposite where you're overtrained and you're overworked, and especially if you go to maybe a smaller school or things like that, I can only assume that limited people, so more stress on your body and mental health. Substance use, whether it's legal or illegal, we know that they use it, and that can definitely increase. And if you look at injuries too, the increase of that, of how whether it's pain medication, because we said like fight off the pain, play through it, and if they can't get the time off, increases their chances of also using substances to get by. And of course, I think just like regular kids, they lose their stress and maybe start drinking or partying. And then, of course, that relays into a risk to them just their stress. And I don't think it's something we talk about a lot with student athletes. Maybe they're expected to party and use substances. But again, what's the reason behind it? And body image. I know you mentioned about female athletes issues with eating disorders. And body image can fall under it's kind of things, but definitely just being dissatisfied with your body, especially like wrestlers, they have to meet a certain weight. We would think of like abnormal ways to about doing it. So that can put a lot of pressure on them. And we think of women being tied to body image issues more than men and are using things like that, but that's not the case at all because they have a reputation to uphold as well, so they're also going to struggle. So like I said, just related to eating disorders and both female but male athletes, but I know when we read research and stuff, it focuses a lot on.
And then looking at the identity a little bit further, looking at student athletes as a whole, there's a lot of good and there can be a handful of bad that can come with that. So looking at the benefits to having a strong identity of being an athlete, there's a sense of community, there is a sense of support, whether it's through teammates, parents, coaches, parents of teammates, you name it, there's going to be that support system. And that's going to get stronger as you play through the season and stay with the same team. But some consequences that could come with having a strong identity in being an athlete could be a little experimentation and finding different identities that can really resonate with you, or things that could help with the transition once that season of life is over. So, I mean, unfortunately, at the end, like there's that identity foreclosure at the end of the era there. Just kind of like a little explosion of not really knowing what to do or where to look and how to identify as a person. So it can leave you kind of empty-handed with that transition if it's not talked about like how we're seeing now.
Yeah, little road
Yeah.
So, all right. So, looking at the work of Donald Super, some context, and then back to the piece about identity foreclosure. So if we're talking about high school age, like 14 to 18, crystallization is what's supposed to be happening there, where you start tentatively developing some sort of plan, but that involves quite a bit of experimentation with different goals. I like to think about like a metaphor of going to like an ice cream shop or like a frozen yogurt shop or something like that. You see all the different flavors and you want to get a little sample of this, that, and you finally decide what you want to order, and then sort of commit to that. If you're an athlete from the beginning, you've always been an athlete, that's all you know, and that's all you want to be, you don't really partake in that sort of whole experimentation, because it's just like, why would you? Because you're an athlete, and that's your path, right? And there's a confidence that goes with it, and there should be a confidence. If you're not a confident athlete, you're not going to likely perform very well. So there should be a healthy level there. But like to a fault, sometimes when you start to consider the statistics off the top of my head, but we're in the high 90s, if not 99 point whatever, in terms of athletes who don't go play professionally, collegiately, right? So just having those conversations about being confident, but right, we'll talk about that in recommendations a little bit.
I was just going to say,
Lesson 2.
Of course, at high school level, talking about career exploration, I'm going to be a professional soccer player. I'm going to be, oh, really? You need to plan a backup.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we have to approach it that way. It's the backup, because we don't want to, especially as a counselor, I can't do lucky dashes all in dreams,
Right.
you know, but, yeah, trying to look in the, it's small of a percentage.
Yeah, you don't want to, you don't want to be threatening to their athletic identity. They're going to be resistant to that, and they'll think like, "Who are you?" Like, don't tell me that I'm not going to make it. I know I am.
Which is, yeah, and like I said, so when I'm talking to them, they'll call back about, well, I mean, you never know, because athletes often have sports injuries.
There you go.
So in case of an injury.
Yeah. Because every play can be relaxed.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Sports particularly.
It's the revenue producing sports, right? It's football, it's basketball. And now we're talking about sports that have it's a whole different presentation, but an overrepresentation of minority athletes in those revenue producing sports, so that it's modeled. And it's like, that's my path, right? So, yeah, but so most, even collegiate athletes, they have an understanding like, okay, this maybe is paying for school and other things, but then there's some who just assume that they are going to go to the top, right? And that's a difficult conversation to have for sure. So if tables aren't your thing, maybe this graphic will be better for you. So back to still relying on the work of Super. Oh, it's a little bit small, hopefully you can see that. Where in this stage, 14 to 18 crystallization, specification 18 to 21. In the life rainbow, talks about exploration being 15 to 24. So that captures high school, it captures college as well. So basically, it's supposed to happen. You're supposed to explore different parts of your identity when you're in high school and even when you're in college, right? I think that presentation this morning about emerging adulthood and that those ages seem to be expanding now. So I think it's just kind of what you're supposed to do. And if you're so tied to being an athlete or a musician or whatever, then that kind of gets lost in terms of development. So some transition stuff.
There's various reasons why students has to and some various reasons that they transition out of sport. From being burnout and just burnout, I think looks different for every single athlete or what it means to them. But in overall kind of terms that we is just being under a great amount of stress. Definitely poor coping behaviors, like I mentioned with their substances, going out and strategies that they use and just having a grip on like their emotions and don't, especially in high school age, don't really understand what they're feeling. And if they don't have the support that helps them understand what they're feeling, I mean, it kind of just goes into really just being fried at the end of it, emotionally, mentally, as an athlete, physically. So they may have their support with their friends who are in it, but that doesn't mean they're experiencing it the exact same thing. Graduation, that's obvious. Yeah, just ending that chapter, and if you don't go into college as an athlete, there's things that they can do there, but it's not the same level. And then of course graduating college, and a lot of kids don't end up doing anything in sports, or they may try, but they still are not at that level. Choice, also various reasons, but them just deciding, hey, I just don't feel like this is for me anymore. I'm going to transition out, and sometimes I feel like if it is a choice, it might be easier for them to transition out just because they kind of worked through that and made that decision, but if it was a choice, regarding other types of influences, it may not have been so easy to.
Like if it's a choice that's theirs, but not really,
Yeah.
I quit, well, I'm not, as an example, this
Yeah.
is not me. I quit sports because I have to work because my mom's in.
right. Or like, I see the writing on the wall, and I'm not gonna play much my senior year, and just, I didn't really want to play that much anyway. And so things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to learn how to set boundaries between like responsibilities and what they want to do, and it's just like this difficult thing that they trying to, and I think sometimes they minimize like what they're doing as well. But yeah, it just feels like, you had a rough thing with a coach, and it kind of turned into, if that led to burnout, you still kind of chose to exit out.
I think too, like that balancing act thing of with the choice, if we're talking college level like scholarships, like if we can't keep that the academics up to where we're supposed to hold that scholarship or what have you, that can play into it. We can't keep it going at the same time.
Injury also varies from person to person, but depending on your sports, all sports, it's can be as quick as sled into home plate and you're out for the rest of the season. And it is hard to bounce back because we're so used to conditioning in the summers. You have practices, so your body takes a chill pill for a little bit, and it's really hard to bounce back if you have a traumatic injury, brain injuries, football players and things like that. So that kind of goes into the choice too, because if they are afraid of that happening again, football players having traumatic brain injuries quite often, and just not wanting to risk more severe damage.
Or making a choice of whether they want to do it.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of work too.
And then just the selection, moving backwards, who get chosen. And that's and that's a problem. That's a hard one, and that plays into a role of like their mental health too, and like their value of themselves. And so if you don't get selected for something, even if you played on the team for 3 years, what that feels like, because it's very quick. There's no easy transition with that. So you don't really see it coming. So it's harder than see the voices.
That's a good point there, because it's one of the things you lose when you lose sport. A lot of times it's your social network. Always in practice with competing, you spend all your time with those people, and that is your friend group. Now, if you're separated from that, now one of the ways to cope with a loss is all of a sudden stripped away from it. So I think the difference with graduation is that there's an element of control that you know what's coming. So you prepare for it more so than you can with injury or deselection of some of these other things. So part of planning, so there's a model of athlete transition that from an article from it's from the 80s, and it really focused on the big athletes. I can't remember the authors. I apologize. But one of the things to talk about was like, to what extent can you control the transition period? If you do that, then the mental health side effects that come along with transition are not quite the same. All right, so an athlete that chooses to walk away, like even a professional athlete, like at the height of their game, just sort of like at a scheduled time that makes sense, is different than somebody who is trying to hang on, and they're just not getting the playing time they used to, and all of a sudden there's like a deselection process that happens. Right? So the more control you have, then the better odds you are adjusting to that transition period. So graduation is one of those things like, all right, I know that I'm going to be done at this time. And then you also have like a cohort that's going through at the same time and finishing at the same time, so that support system stays with it.
So we had students.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I would say also, whatever, like you're saying, control is a big thing, and I think that's where it's difficult when you have athletes that still graduation for them it's really professionally and with students graduation. They're not seeing graduation achievement or so I think that's where it can, like a lot of these can be things that are just depending on what
That's what we need to do. Take half the counseling services as part of being, especially if you have that helping them this transition. Because somebody who isn't ready when graduation comes to happen, potentially, in the future. I think I'm learning how to focus, as athletes are competitive. There's a competitive drive, that's why they're athletes. I think partly having another person who can focus on.
yeah, because I had so many athletes that would come to me and tell me all these things afterwards. And I'm like, what did you talk about with your class? Like, oh yeah, they know my major. They know what I'm doing. And it's like, okay, but you are majoring in that, so like, do you have interest in it? Do you want to pursue it? You know, I had one athlete that I ended up trying to help him navigate getting into the master's program in his, last semester of college. That's really difficult, especially. I would also have actually stressful student students. They also just they don't know the resources available. Like, that's one of the so, always thinking of being an athlete, patient. They don't even think of those options. Yeah. We had a student come over Norway, and then he went back because it was too far. And we were on a team where it was 1/3 of the athletes were and so that would have been like the biggest community of other international students we could have had, and it was still too difficult. Because then you go into the classroom and you don't have student body. So that's really difficult.
See, what else? So we kind of got into this a little bit, so this is good. Mental health ultimately is what we're concerned with, mental well-being of our student athletes. But sort of orbiting that are these concepts of identity and transition. To identify too strongly as an athlete, the team away from depression, anxiety, substance abuse, all sorts of things can manifest. Certainly, if it happens, if you transition, it's done so in an abrupt way. Like if you go, let's say you're on the JV team and you're in high school, and you know for sure you're going to make varsity, and you go check the. I don't know if these coaches post lists anymore, if it's just kind of done electronically. I'm out of touch with that, but you go and check the list, and your name's not there. Right, so that moment of and then realizing that you've been cut, and that is something you've been relying on. It's not an option anymore. That can certainly throw you for a bit. Right? So and then injury, especially if someone one injury, okay, but then if there's multiple, think about how that can affect somebody's mental health over time. So again, you see athletes often crying on the field after an injury, and I'm not so sure that it all has to do with the physical pain. I think a lot of it might be related to the frustration that they feel that I cannot believe this happened. So it's just, we're just all intertwined, right? So being so invested in that part of your identity, and part of an identity that for over 98% is temporary. But an identity that you have to kind of put a lot of effort and energy into in order to like be successful in it. So it's really kind of an odd place to be. Like I need to really focus on being an athlete. But if I focus too much, then it's going to hurt me in other ways. So, yeah. So we got some. So we're okay at time. We'll double check. But we mentioned we're going to do a little case study to talk about it. But
So there's kind of a presentation for athlete that we have. So a 15-year-old female student athlete in softball from the age of 5 up to 19. During this time, there was an obvious like power struggle with the coach. The coach at the time too was actually a soccer coach, so he trained the players like a soccer team. So yes, so there was a lot. Our warm up was like 2 miles. Like it was an extensive amount of running.
use the power so you kind of powder yourself.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like being on the team. So yeah. But yeah, so just his methods were very different. I mean, still decided to stay with the team despite all the kind of chaos that was going on. Even though there was a lot of anger involved, a lot of frustration, a lot of self-doubt. It's kind of the expectation that if you're going to be a student athlete, you don't quit on the spot. You kind of power through, regardless of how much you're not having fun. And that's also a sign of just fear of failure. Even though if the coach is telling you that you're a failure, quitting and leaving makes you feel like a bigger one. So it's kind of like pick your battle. So it's kind of a battle I chose here. After that time, and we talked about like the amount of time that athletes spend. For me, I played softball all year round at one point. I played ball. So I was in it almost like 10 months out of the year. So during this time, I ended up going into playing summer, but I noticed very quickly how that kind of affected me, but I don't think I processed it right away. So during that time, it was very much like I am bad, so I played bad. You know, the beliefs, I think we talked about in the session earlier today, just like these formed and learned beliefs that we have about ourselves affect how we function. And that's exactly how it came across. And I was angry when somebody tried to tell me otherwise. But I played poorly because I felt poor about myself. So after that summer season with my town team, I left. At the time, I lost all passion, all dedication for it. But it took about a year, I would say, afterwards for me to like realize like his voice was still playing in my head and things like that. And what I experienced as a JV student athlete has even played a role in my adulthood. So into adulthood, and I've seen it with other people too, just struggles with personal mental health, finding your identity, like we talked about, like who am I now? Have I always been a failure because somebody made me out that way? Haven't seen it just with myself, but with so many athletes that I've talked to and have been around that nobody really talked about it at the time because it was it's a stigma. You're an athlete of any sort, male, female. So you're supposed to be mentally strong. These people are critiquing you in a healthy way. We really have to be careful about how we word things to kids at that age and college athletes too. It's not just children that need to be protected. And then just issues with finding self-worth all over again, and definitely not just with me, but with other people having that difficulty balancing their emotions towards people in power, whether it is a coach or a teacher, Because, teachers in high school weren't always that supportive either. So what was carrying on one facet of my life and other people's lives carried on to the other, and nobody was connecting dots. And not saying that they didn't care, but maybe they just weren't picking up on it. So definitely just like these issues, and like I said, yes, this is like my story and everything, but it happens with just about all often.
I think it's a great story. I appreciate you sharing with us. The part that sticks out for me personally is that line about taking a full, taking a year to fully process it. And I would say that there are some former student athletes where it takes a whole lot longer, right? They might suffer with depression, anxiety, and issues with self-worth, like into their adulthood, and not realize like where it came from, right? That it might be rooted in their athletic experience. So the fact that you're able to kind of recognize it within a year might seem like a long time, but I think it's relatively short. Especially because young athletes, they might not know the terminology of like identity, role experimentation, identity foreclosure, and like it's not part of their world. So they're not going to recognize the process that's playing out necessarily unless we as counselors perhaps like educate them on that.
That's when a lot of you'll see reports and stuff. But there's a lot of evidence that shows how much student athletes struggle with, whether it's high school or college or whatever. You're trying to find yourself in something else. A lot of times it's things that you're going into.
We're kind of running up against the end of the hour here, so I just want to quickly go over some recommendations. So obviously, if you're in a position where you can have access to coaches, the more coaches know about this stuff here, the better. You have access to the athletes, addressing them as a group. Fantastic. But I think next week I'm going to go talk to the BU about the freshman football team, the incoming class, about some of the same stuff. Educating them in the process so they start recognizing what sort of process is playing out in terms of like their identity, et cetera. You mentioned backup plan. I'm going to say post-sport. Right? Because it's not as threatening. Right? Because even if you're a Hall of Famer, you're going to be done at some point, and you might want to do something else. All right, so let's consider some things that when you're done playing, I know it's not going to be for a long time. I know you're going to have a long, successful career, but after, then what? And maybe exposing them to careers that are closely linked to the sport, but not necessarily an athlete, right? So from being a trainer to equipment manager to working in a front office, there's a million different things you could do working in sport. And then finally, just talking, like empowering students around decisions. So giving them more of a sense of control. If they sort of develop other areas and cultivate other areas of their identity, more control of the things that they're interested in, and more well-rounded, and then they could be in a better place to make decisions that make sense for them instead of thinking this is the only thing that I have to invest in being an athlete because it's the only thing I'm good at. So I have no other choice. So I guess in that sense, I feel like it's kind of like a loss of control. Like I don't have any options except this. But yeah, I think it's about control, education, and then, letting them know what the process is that's playing out in terms of identity transition and ultimately their. So I appreciate all the discussion and everything. We are a little bit over time.